right, welcome back guys to our next installment of your Article 1 guided notes. If you're here, it's because you're interested in completing Section 8 of those notes. Now, today we are going to talk about one very simple question. What does Congress actually do on a daily basis, and why does it matter? The big thing you need to know here is that average Americans really don't know much about what Congress does on a daily basis. And truthfully, until I actually read the Constitution, I fully didn't understand what that job looked like either. So we're going to break it down for you. Before we jump into the role of Congress, we're going to talk about 3 key terms that you need to know at the top of your notes. The first key term is constituent. Constituent. A constituent is a voting member of a community, somebody who votes for these representatives. A constituent. The second key word we're going to talk about, and it is an interesting topic no doubt, is impeachment. Impeachment is the formal process of accusing an official of wrongdoing, not just reserved for the office of the president. Impeachment could happen to any elected official. Now, it may, but does not have to include removal from office. In other words, to say that somebody was impeached does not mean that they were removed from office, and we'll talk about that with some examples today. It could also include criminal or civil punishment, according to the Constitution, although that has not happened. The next one, the next little tidbit you need to know is that the House of Representatives actually initiates the trial. They actually bring the charges forward. They're called articles of impeachment, and they pass them in a similar fashion as to the House would pass a bill. Once those articles are passed or not through the House, it is sent up to the Senate, where the Senate actually holds the trial. They act as the jury during the impeachment trial. We'll break that down a little bit more later on, but just so you know that word is coming. Now, the third key term, I'm going to get out of the way a little bit, is naturalization. Naturalization. Naturalization is the process of gaining citizenship, the process of becoming a citizen. Okay, so those are our 3 key terms. Feel free to pause the video and take a look and make sure you have everything filled in before moving on to the quadrants. Now, you'll notice on your notes that things are organized into 4 different quadrants. These are the 4 quadrants that we broke down the jobs of Congress according to the Constitution, because there's a lot of jobs. If there's one thing you've noticed so far, it's that Congress has a lot of stuff to do and they have a lot of power. So we're going to break it down into quadrants. The first one you already know. The legislative branch is in charge of making laws, or legislating. So in that first box on the top, I need you to write legislates. This includes proposing bills, researching issues, amending and changing those bills over and over again, debating those bills on the floor of Congress, especially in the Senate, and then again responding to vetoes from the president and trying to gather a supermajority. Remember the journey of a bill becoming a law. Yes, we talked about this, we looked at examples, all that jazz. It's probably the most known quadrant, right? We know that Congress makes laws, but there's more. There is much more. The second quadrant here is titled Exercises Constitutional Powers. Exercises constitutional powers. Congress has some very specific responsibilities because the Founding Fathers trusted Congress to make good decisions because, frankly, there's a lot of people there. So they thought it would balance out the different interests. So they gave them some very special jobs, including, number 1, creating the rules for naturalization. This includes creating a list of requirements for somebody interested in becoming an American citizen. So they're in charge of those rules, not the president. So oftentimes in the news, we'll hear about the presidency determining rules for different programs to allow or disallow immigrants from coming in the country, or even hearing the changes to those rules in the Supreme Court. It actually, that power itself is reserved to Congress and Congress alone. So the president can propose suggestions and the Supreme Court can respond to civil cases, but that really is the job of Congress. Number 2, they regulate trade or commerce that is interstate, meaning that it goes over state borders. They exercise oversight. Oversight means that they actually are in charge of making sure that people in government are doing their jobs. They're kind of like the referees or the reporters to figure out what's going on. Next, they appropriate money, meaning they get money together together for really expensive things like a stimulus bill. And lastly, this is one that is often overlooked, they declare war. Now, technically, Congress has not declared war since World War II. The president has actually, we haven't as a country officially declared war since then, yet we've been involved in wars. So it's important to understand that that definition has changed quite a bit. With that being said, officially and constitutionally speaking, Congress is supposed to declare war. But in times of national crisis, let's say right after the attacks on September 11th, then President Bush responded by essentially initiating the war in Afghanistan and eventually the war in Iraq without Congress's approval, because he sort of described it as a short-term installment, although it went on to be the longest war we've been involved in. So again, it's sort of a gray area, but our founding fathers reserved that right to Congress. Okay, third quadrant, balances power, meaning making sure that the other branches of government don't get too much power. Number one, they use their impeachment powers. We'll break that down in a second. Number two, they confirm presidential nominations. This includes the Supreme Court, as well as it goes on to include also the cabinet and the different members that work for the president. They have to all be approved by the Senate. Okay, and then the next responsibility of Congress is to ratify treaties. The president can go and make a treaty with a different country, say Mexico or Canada, but Congress has to approve of that treaty. Now let's talk about impeachment, that first one. How many presidents have been impeached in our history? 4. 4 presidents have in fact been impeached. None of them have been removed from office following a Senate trial. So let's talk about them really quickly. Number 1, we have this guy. This is Andrew Johnson. He was impeached after the Civil War. Next, we have Bill Clinton. He was impeached for lying to Congress. Next, we have this man, Donald J. Trump. He was in fact impeached as well. We know the story, talking about involvement with foreign countries. And then last but not least, we have Richard Nixon, who we're going to talk about in a second. All 3 of these figures were in fact impeached, meaning that the trial was held in the Senate. The articles of impeachment were passed by the House. However, none of them were removed from office. They were all acquitted. The last figure who was in fact impeached was Richard Nixon. Now this is wild. Richard Nixon was charged with lying to the American people and a plethora of other crimes. And the truth of the matter was, following something called the Watergate scandal, he was in fact guilty and they had recordings of it. In order to dodge a trial in the Senate that was going to most definitely lead to him being found guilty and potentially removed from office, he quit. He quit his job as the president. He boarded the helicopter outside of the White House called Marine One and got out of town. So, yes, he was going to be impeached, but he resigned or quit before that impeachment vote was held. Okay, moving on. Last quadrant here is represents constituents. Thinking back to your list of words at the top, a constituent is a voting member of a community. In other words, it's anybody who's 18 or over living in a community. The last quadrant, which is often overlooked by both representatives and citizens alike, is that they, meaning the representatives, work for us, the constituents. And the Constitution says specifically that these representatives are required to do these things. Number 1, they are responsible for informing us constituents about the issues. Number 2, they are responsible for corresponding. They have to respond to your email and phone call. Number 3, they support constituents, meaning that if a constituent wants to get involved in politics, technically I could write one of my representatives and ask for support in that. Number 4, they advocate for constituents and for our issues as a local community. And then number 5, they help constituents access government to understand what's going on. Now, constitutionally, they are required to do this. Does this happen regularly? I can tell you as a constituent, no, it does not. In order to really get involved in government as an average person, to be completely honest, you have to really go out there and figure it out yourself. Luckily, we live in an age of information with access to information, and access to people pretty easily. But I think this quadrant is often forgotten about. So again, the big thing is people often forget that it's their constitutional job. Okay, so that's the end of section 8. Thank you for listening.